Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Dimitri Johnson, and you're listening to MMA Latest News.
It's time to roll, baby.
Hello and welcome back to MMA Latest News. My name is James Sweetenham and we've got an absolutely stacked show for you today. We're going to kick off with UFC 242 and Khabib Nurmagomedov's victory over Dustin Poirier. Then we're going to talk about Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal and where that leaves Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. We're going to talk Cowboy versus Gaethje. We're going to talk Chris Cyborg. It's all going off today. We've got a cracking show for you. Leave your comments and I'll answer them at the end of the video. Now let's talk about Khabib. He was absolutely brilliant. You would have seen us all watching the watch along and we were amazed by what was an incredible performance. Dominance from start to finish. His ground game, as usual, was terrific. His takedowns, unbelievable. And he's beginning to make a case for himself being the greatest lightweight who has ever lived. Now, let's give some credit to Dustin Poirier because he gave it absolutely everything. We talked last week, the man's an absolute diamond of a bloke. His nickname really is fitting. He does so much charity work in Lafayette. He's an absolute warrior in the cage. He'd beaten Pettis. He'd beaten Gaethje. He'd beaten Eddie Alvarez. He'd even beaten Max Holloway. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. Although we did have moments of success in the fight. He landed a huge right hand, which wobbled Khabib for a couple of seconds. We thought on the watch long, is the upset going to happen? Is Dustin Poirier going to do it? But sadly for him, it wasn't to be. And in the third round, he wrapped in a guillotine, but he wasn't quite able to get the job over the line. And Khabib saw it through and strangled Dustin Poirier and choked him via rear naked choke. In a great performance, Khabib probably better than the likes of BJ Penn now. I think he's up there with not only the greatest lightweights of all time, potentially the greatest fighters of all time. A 28-0 record in this sport is unheard of. And the only sort of man that's in and around that realm is John Jones, of course, that lost to Matt Hamill. I think we all know it wasn't really a loss. So those two men stand out as two of the greatest of all time. But nobody dominates in the way that Khabib does. I suppose you could lean towards Jones because he does everything brilliantly. But Khabib does one thing so well, and it's all that he needs. He grinds down his opponents and beats them all so comfortably. So we ask the question, who is next? And the only man for me is El Kukui, Tony Ferguson. That's the only matchup who I can see potentially beating Khabib. Tony Ferguson's an absolute madman, throws strikes from all sorts of ridiculous angles. He's going to approach the task in a completely unique way. And let's face it, the last place you want Tony Ferguson to be is on his back. He's got that incredible jiu-jitsu. He could chalk out anybody like we saw when he beat Kevin Lee, a similar sort of grappler to Khabib. So it's a difficult matchup for Khabib, and I think that fight is definitely the one we have to make next, because if they give it to somebody like, say, a Conor McGregor, where is the integrity in a sport? You can't make a rematch of a fight which was so one-sided the first time round. Tony Ferguson, Khabib Nurmagomedov, that's the fight to make. It's been made 4 times now. It's been cancelled 4 times. But the fact that people are still interested, even a 5th time down the line, shows the appetite that people have for this fight. It's 2 of the greatest lightweights of all time, maybe the 2 greatest lightweights of all time. Khabib, Tony, it's the fight to make. And for me at the moment, it's the biggest fight in mixed martial arts. Now, moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about Paul Felder. He was brilliant when he beat Edson Barboza. I picked him on the watch-along. I felt that the momentum was with Paul Felder. Edson Barboza has been terrific throughout his career, but I think he's lost 4 of his last 5 now. I think he's coming towards the end. But he did win that first round. In the second round, he was doing quite well until he took Paul Felder down. And Paul Felder, who has the most knockouts in UFC history via elbow, showed exactly why. He cut Edson Barboza from the bottom. And then in the third round, he walked him down. And I think he was more than deserving of the victory at the end. I thought 30-27 to either man was wrong. I just got it 2 rounds to 1 to Paul Felder. But either way, I thought he was the rightful winner. That is the biggest victory of his entire career. Where does he go from here? I wouldn't be against Paul Felder retiring. When you hint about it in your post-fight interviews, it shows you've already got 1 foot out of the door. So he's already got that commentary gig lined up. So I wouldn't mind Paul Felder moving on to bigger and better things. Now, let's talk a bit about the welterweight division, and Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal has been announced to headline Madison Square Garden for the baddest motherfucker title. An interesting one for Dana White. Some say he's degrading the product. Others say it's a little bit of an interesting concept. These two men are absolute gangsters. Nate Diaz does what he wants, whenever he wants. The man from Stockton smokes weed whenever he likes. There's nothing you can do to stop Nate Diaz from doing whatever he sees fit. After 3 years out the sport, he comes back, blitzes Anthony Pettis in comfortable fashion and calls out Jorge Masvidal because that is the money fight. That's the fight that the fans want to see. And Jorge Masvidal himself has rose to stardom since beating Darren Till via a horrifying knockout and then scoring the quickest knockout in UFC history when he knocked out Ben Askren. These two men are the rightful men to headline Madison Square Garden. Now, Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman both were capable of headlining that card. Let's face it, they're the rightful men that are meant to be fighting for that UFC world title. Kamaru Usman, obviously the champion, was terrific last time out against Tyron Woodley. And then Colby Covington was brilliant against Robbie Lawler. They sold the fight afterwards. They got in a bit of a squabble in the studios at ESPN. So it felt like the right fight. Of course, there's that sort of racial undertones with Colby Covington wearing the Make America Great hat again, and of course, Kamaru Usman being of Nigerian descent. But if we're going to be honest, despite the fact they're the rightful men, and despite the fact that they are the more talented men, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal are the biggest stars in that welterweight division, bar none. They are the number one and the number two. So if it makes business sense, it's the right card to headline Madison Square Garden. So those two men are more likely to do more pay-per-view buys than Covington and Usman, and hopefully that fight can get made in the not-too-distant future. And regardless of who wins that fight, it's interesting. Diaz and Masvidal would happily fight the winner. And something, of course, it's been going on all week. Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal, meant to be good friends, they're falling out. Colby Covington describing the baddest motherfucker title as a belt for journeyman, of course, Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz coming off a few losses in their career. But I think what resonates with fans with those two men is their willingness to fight absolutely anybody, whereas Colby Covington, he's picked and choosed. He's awkward with money. He's not the gangster behind the scenes that people want him to be. We know that Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal will have a fight at the drop of a hat. Colby Covington called the police when Fabricio Verdun for a boomerang at him. That's the sort of person we're dealing with. So Diaz and Masvidal, they're the stars. They're the men to headline. And best of luck to them. It's sure to be an absolutely terrific bout. Now, next up on the show, we're going to be talking all about Curtis Woodhouse. And this is interesting. The ex-former professional footballer, of course, those might remember him for playing for Sheffield United and Birmingham City, a good Premier League level footballer, and, of course, an ex-British boxing world champion. Of course, that's a great achievement. Now, he's been picking on the MMA community for a while now, winding them up about submitting in fights. This is interesting. Of course, there is more, I suppose, if you want to call it quitting in MMA than boxing. But that is because MMA, if we're going to be honest, is not only a more hard concept to grasp in terms of sport, but also it puts you through so many more pain barriers. Look, I've been punched in the face, it hurts. But it hurts a lot more to be put in an armbar. They are absolute nightmare. And I'd rather take 36 minutes of being punched in the face than 5 seconds of an armbar. That's why fighters in MMA have to give up compared to boxers. The difference is that if you see a boxer quit, it's this disgusting thing because they've given up after not taking as much pain necessarily as an MMA fighter. I've been in crowds where a boxer's quit. One that stands out to me, I remember going to Bramall Lane when Kell Brook fought Errol Spence, and Kell Brook gave up. And I know he had an eye injury that night, but it left a bit of a sour taste in the mouth. Whereas when a fighter quits in MMA, they've quit because they physically can't continue. In boxing, you can carry on. You can take a bit more punishment. Whether that's good for your health or not is up for debate. But in MMA, 9 times out of 10, when you're in a submission, that is game over. Dustin Poirier at the weekend, for example, he's an absolute warrior. He tapped out because he physically couldn't go on. Once he was in that rear naked choke, it was either blackout or tap out, and he picked to tap out. We see warriors, the likes of Michael Bisping, Robert Whittaker, Mark Hunt, absolute demons in the cage. Some of the hardest men to have ever walked the face of the earth. And they tap when they have to. So Curtis Woodhouse is in no particular position to comment on this. If he was in an MMA cage, he would tap out from this. It goes without saying. He's been calling out the likes of Paddy Pimblett and Brad Pickett. And if you've got to support Curtis Woodhouse, you can say he's just baiting people up. He's trying to get a reaction, and that's most certainly what he's getting. But when he calls out the likes of Paddy Pimblett, if we're going to be honest, if they set foot in a cage together, Paddy Pimblett would get the job done within about a minute of the contest. He could do whatever he liked to Curtis Woodhouse. And it's the same in a boxing ring. Curtis Woodhouse would beat Paddy Pimblett. They're two completely separate sports, and this rivalry needs to be taken away a little bit because they're gladiators in both sports. But if we're going to be honest, a submission is far worse than being punched in the face. That's just the reality. And I'm a huge boxing fan as well. So Curtis Woodhouse needs to maybe lay off a bit, needs to stop having to go at the likes of Brad Pickett, who, let's face it, they're legends in the sport. If you're going to pick on the current fighters, that's fair enough, but you need to show a bit more respect to the likes of Brad Pickett, people who've pioneered the sport. And for Curtis Woodhouse, yeah, just stop winding people up. Enough's enough. And also stop going on at other athletes about your money. You're a retired man. You've made a hell of a lot of money in football. That goes without saying. He'll have made a lot of money in his boxing career on Sky Sports. Probably a similar amount to what you fight for in Cage Warriors. I know that a lot of the people who even headline the Sky Sports bills aren't getting paid that much. I know some people who are in co-main event slots are only getting 10 grand. And in recent fights, Curtis has been fighting in Sports Hill. So it's good what he's doing. I know he does a lot of motivational talks, and that's terrific. But keep your mouth out of MMA for now, considering you don't know what it's like to be submitted. You don't know that pain. Anyway, moving on to Justin Gaethje versus Cowboy Cerrone, and that's an absolutely terrific contest. I can't see this one being anything else other than a fight of the year, maybe one of the greatest fights ever, because these men absolutely bring it. They come for war every single time. Justin Gaethje isn't called the human highlight reel for no reason. He's terrific. He hasn't had a fight in the UFC that wasn't worth watching. Donald Cowboy Cerrone, we know what he's like. He fights about 700 times a year because he just loves a war. Who wins this one? I'm going to edge slightly towards Justin Gaethje, the fresher man, the man who's been terrific the last couple of times. We were worried that maybe he might get a hint of brain damage after some bad knockouts to Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier, but he's come back and he knocked out James Vick and then Edson Barboza in incredible fashion. So we've got to make him the favourite. Something that's interesting, though, Gaethje's usually going to war. So the fact that his last two contests have been over relatively quickly may work in his favour because he's not taking as much punishment, but at the same time, he's not spent that much time in the octagon. And Cerrone isn't usually a man who fades early, so he could be dragged in deep here, Gaethje. Colby Cerrone has obviously been in the deep waters so many times, but at the age of 36, how many times can he keep rolling back the years? I know when he gave birth to his son, he was looking like Daddy Cerrone, but unfortunately, Father Time might catch up with him eventually. He can't go on forever, and that's why I edge towards Justin Gaethje. Now, next on the show, we're going to be talking about Cris Cyborg. She's just signed a deal with Bellator, and Scott Coker has decided that it is the greatest deal in women's MMA history. I think Cyborg's still got a lot to give in the sport. I think she can become a world champion again at Bellator. It goes without saying she's one of the best fighters in the world. I think in terms of the UFC, she showed in the last performance against Felicia Spencer that she was never going to beat Amanda Nunes, if we're going to be honest. I think Cris Cyborg was this huge powerhouse and she bullied people for so many years. But eventually there comes a fighter whose technical skill just outrages your raw size and power. And that's what Amanda Nunes was for Cris Cyborg for me. So I think Cris Cyborg, this move to Bellator's good, of course. She's had a frosty relationship with Dana White. She can start anew under Scott Coker. And yeah, I think she'll be the champion in no time at all. She'll be getting paid well over there, so I'm really happy for her. Let's see her fight soon in the Bellator cage, and she'll be the champion. Now, let's address some of the comments. Khabib versus Tony O'Connor. We've talked about this. Me and Kieran actually did a debate earlier on the new show, which is called The Tap Out, which will be released on Thursday. So tune into that. Some heated debate between me and Kieran. But, of course, we talked about that a little bit on that show. I personally edged towards El Kukui. I think Conor McGregor wasn't competitive in that first fight with Khabib, and therefore, Tony, who's been going on for so long, had so many victories back-to-back. He's a mentalist. We've got to give him the shot at that world title. Great ideas. Where did you think of that? Of course, Mitch, Cage Chat, he was our host today. He's obviously having a bit of banter behind the scenes. Top idea, Kieran, a non-bully mentality right there. I'm not sure exactly what Mitchell is accusing Kieran of, but we are, of course, anti-bullying here at MMA Latest. Usman will destroy Covington. I think style-wise they are exactly the same in and around. Both have freak fitness and both have incredible wrestling. I think Covington's slightly more unconventional with striking. He's not technically quite as good as Usman. Usman, of course, he's no Floyd Mayweather. But I have to edge slightly towards Usman. I think he keeps the pace up slightly better than than Covington does. So I'm going to edge slightly towards Usman. I think he's just about the better operator, but it's such a close concept. And I think that it's going to be an incredibly heated build-up when this one eventually happens. I know UFC 245 is around the corner. Could it headline that bill? Or do we build it and let it headline in February or March? I mean, UFC 250 is not that far away when we really think about it. It's going to be coming up ever so quickly, so we're going to need big fights for that. So whether that is Covington Usman, whether that is Khabib versus Tony, it's all going on in the world of MMA, and I can't wait for it. Covington is better. I mean, you can see that point of view. He was definitely better against Robbie Lawler. I edged towards Usman because he did it at the much higher level against Tyron Woodley. Tyron looked almost indestructible as champion. And let's not forget, Tyron Woodley is an excellent wrestler. He's not just a powerhouse. And the fact that Usman was able to dominate him in the fashion that he did, we have to say that Usman goes in the favourite. Marilyn Chicken puts a thumbs up. Thank you, Marilyn. Always appreciated with me. Yeah, but I don't like him automatically, so Usman will win. Look, Mitchell, I don't think any of us massively like Colby Covington. He's a bit of an idiot. Of course, if you're going to go on and on and on about you being this bad man, hard man, you have to back it up. You can't press charges when somebody throws a boomerang at you. Grow up, Colby. Stop this weird gimmick. You can't be taken seriously when you're trash talking, you're stuttering and stumbling the whole way through. So that's why a lot of people, I think, will be rooting for Usman. People are talking about Covington. That is good. He is getting his name out there. But what is interesting is the fact that he's not really a draw yet. I know that his fight with Robbie Lawler didn't do too many seats. There weren't that many attendants. And when he was the co-main event of that Robert Whittaker-Yoel Romero battle, when he fought Rafael dos Anjos, I think it only did about 250,000 pay-per-view buys. So he's not a star like Conor is, like Michael Bisping is, like Trevor Sean is, the great trash talkers of the past. So he's got a long way to go. Where does Poirier go from here? I don't know. He's hinted at retirement, and if he made that decision, I'd have no ill will towards him. I really like Dustin Poirier. He's a top fella. I think we all can agree. I've seen posts on my timeline of people saying, please don't trash Dustin Poirier around me. Everybody loves him. Has he got more to give in the sport? Absolutely. I mean, if Tony Ferguson finds a way to beat Khabib, then why don't we do Tony versus Dustin Poirier? That's an interesting fight. Khabib isn't going to go on forever. He's definitely not the very best lightweights in the world, so I would like to see Dustin Poirier stick around, but ultimately it's up to him. If he does call it a day, he's given the sport absolutely everything, and as fans, I think we have to love him and adore him for that. Hashtag banter. Cheers, Mitchell. Look, I love a bit of banter on the show, and hopefully we can bring that more out throughout the coming weeks. Probably to Louisiana. Yeah, I'd imagine Mitch, he'll probably be heading to Louisiana. That's where he's from. Liam Busha, is Kieran even Irish? I spoke to Kieran earlier today, and from the sounds of his accent, I can confirm that Kieran is in fact Irish. That's all we've got time for on MMA Latest News today. I think it's been a terrific show. Make sure you tune into the Tap Out, which will be released on Thursday. Some really interesting debates and a lot going on MMA Latest News. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I'll be joining you next Tuesday.